performance, it's a festival. And he made us chant it, and I sat there thinking, oh, great, we want it to feel like a festival, but actually we're in a lecture theatre, we're in a building, is it really going to feel like a festival? Well, I'm pleased to say those people who were here yesterday hopefully will agree with me. It is a festival. It feels like a festival. It's got buzziness, it's got things happening all over the place, we've got performances, we've got music, and the whole point of this is for it to be relaxed, informal, and to generate lots of ideas, debate, discussion, and overall, the most important thing, celebrating the great things that are happening in education in our region. It was a fantastic day yesterday, and we're looking forward to today. So, welcome everybody. I have the task of introducing my friend, Ros Wilson. I'm not going to read her biography, it's in the programme, it'll only go to her head. For many of you, she won't need an introduction because the impact that she's had on children, on teachers, on learning in our region is enormous over many years. I've only really known her for 3 or 4 years, but it feels like a lifetime because she's like my bossy mum now. She bosses me around, she tells me what to do. Mostly, I follow her instructions, but not always. She's always an inspiration. She always makes you laugh. She'll probably swear a bit, she usually does. At this point, she's sitting there and she still probably doesn't know what she's actually going to say when she stands up. But I can guarantee whatever she says, it will inspire you and it will amuse you. Over to you, Ros.
Thank you. Thanks, Sam. I just feel so privileged, colleagues. It's just lovely to be here again. I've made so many wonderful friends just in this last few years, which is incredible, isn't it? Because most normal people would have retired and be sitting in a deck chair somewhere, and I'm still having fun. Sam has become a great friend, and of course her dameship as well, and I love every opportunity to meet up with them. And actually, I know you're all sitting there thinking how lovely I look today. And that's because this is the first outing for this jacket. This is a new jacket. And I've named it the Professor Jacket. Because I own this jacket because of my good friend. And I didn't do that, did I? The Professor Obe. We were going to visit a school together, the wonderful Parklands Primary School in Seacroft. And she said, I'll tell you what, I'll take you out for lunch. And I thought, how nice to take Granny out for lunch. And she did take me out for lunch, and we had a delightful lunch, and it didn't matter at all that it took an hour and a half before the food came to the table. And we enjoyed it, and I bought this jacket there that day. And I never knew that Tesco Extra could be such fun. £30 I paid for this, colleagues, £30. So thank you, Sam. It's down to you. We worked it out last night at dinner. This year is my 55th year in education. But of course, I didn't expect that. I'll clap you. You're surviving me. That's worth a clap, isn't it? If you actually think about it, though, I started school when I was 3 years old. So actually, it's my 71st year in education because I've never been anywhere else. I've never done anything else but be in schools and teaching, apart from the 3 wonderful years rampaging around Bretton Hall. Trialling the delights of drink, you know, but that was a diversion. One thing, Bretton Hall, which was a teacher training college, and is now the Yorkshire Sculpture Park, one thing it didn't teach me was how to teach. I had no idea how to teach when I left that place, but I'd had a lot of fun learning nothing for 3 years. So thank you to Breton and the wonderful people I met there. And I still remember my first day as a teacher, you know, it was incredible. I roared up to Normanton Secondary Modern, that's Normie near Castleford, not Normie in Derbyshire. And on my Honda 50, you know, going some belt up Heath Common, and swung into the school, and there was a wonderful, huge empty place at the foot of the front steps, and I thought, how splendid for me, and I parked my Honda 50 there. And standing on the steps, there was a really scowly-faced woman. And she didn't come up and hug me. She didn't say welcome to the profession. She didn't even shake my hand. She didn't even introduce herself. She just went, "Follow me!" So I followed her. And we charged down some corridors and through a hall and round into a brand new 60s build wing. And she physically pushed me through a door. And she shoved a register in my hand, and she said, "This is your room, this is your register." And she never spoke to me again in the 5 years I was in the school. And that was Molly Wormald, the deputy head. Well, I'd been hiding in that room for 4 days, faking being a teacher. I think faking it is one of the greatest talents you can develop as a teacher, isn't it? And I've been faking for as many years as I've been talking, which was probably the year before I was born when I think about it. And I was hiding in this room on the 4th day at the start of school. I suddenly became aware that there was some sort of kerfuffle going on outside my classroom door. And I knew I was supposed to be a teacher, and teachers were supposed to do something about kerfuffles. So I crept to my classroom door and I opened it gingerly and I peered through the gap. And opposite my room there was the most beautiful, polished, open tread staircase. This is 1965. I had never seen an open tread staircase before. They were revolutionary then. And dripping through these stairs, there was copious amounts of blood. Well, I didn't know what to do, so I edged round the door and I edged along the corridor until I could see up the stairs. And on the stairs, there was this gang of lads. And one of them had a Stanley knife, and he'd slashed another lad across his forehead. And you know how foreheads pop open like that? And it was pouring blood. And I froze, because nothing at Breton had taught me what you did about a slashing on the stairs outside your classroom door. But luckily, at that moment, out of a door over there, burst Bernard the Bastard. I'm sorry, I have to call him that, because that's what everybody called him. The staff, the kids, everyone. I didn't know any other name for him. He was the head of maths. And he was clutching a large briefcase. And I thought, how good at a time like this, bring your briefcase. But it was, you see, because he put it down, and out of that briefcase he took the biggest sanitary towel you've ever seen in your life. You know the maternity sanitary towels that you wore when you were having a baby? You men just have to get your imagination going. You didn't go through that excitement. And I thought, how useful at a time like this, a sanitary towel. But it was, you see, because in those days they came with loops. You had a little bit of elastic you wore around your middle, and they had 2 hooks, and you hooked your loops. Is this a bit graphic for 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning? Onto your hooks. So he took this towel and he put it round that lad's forehead, and he tied the loops in a beautiful bow at the back, and it was perfect. It did the job. It was doing what it was made for. Did absolutely nothing for that poor lad's street cred, but it did an awful lot for the bleeding. So I've travelled the world with a briefcase stuffed full of sanitary towels ever since, just in case. So that was welcome to the world of teaching, and I learned so much about teaching there, because that's where you learn to teach, isn't it, in the classroom, when you're watching the colleagues you admire. Well, I didn't do a lot of watching in Normanton, because there wasn't a lot to admire in the 60s in education, but I had a lot of fun there, and I made some good friends there. You know, I learnt about religion in a secondary modern school through the assemblies. The head teacher, T.D. Morgan, used to take assemblies with his gown on. He thought he was in Eton, I think, not Normanton Secondary Modern. And he used to stand on the stage and tuck his thumbs in his gown, and he rocked, and he talked to the ceiling, and he pontificated. And as he did it, Basher Burgess, the second deputy head, used to roam up and down the rows of kids, punching them in the kidneys and going, "Jesus loves you." And if the kids flinched, they were sent to the office. And by the end of assembly, there were about 20 to 30 kids lined up outside Basher's office. And he'd get the cane out, and he'd go down the row, and he'd give them 3 on each hand. Do you know, it must have worked. They must have loved it, because the same 20 kids were there the next day, it must have been the highlights of their day. So, yeah, I learned that there. Oh, and one more little memory from Normanton, and that was Stan Wilcox. He taught geography. He was quite a local hero. He'd been in the war. And his classes never moved. They never murmured, they never spoke, they never played up. And Normie was a tough school to work in the 60s, and it quite likely it still is, I don't know. And he was a chain smoker. So every 10 minutes he popped out of his classrooms and went in the quad and had a cigarette. And the classes never moved. They were silent. They sat in. I didn't know how he was doing it. Anyway, one day, Basher said to me, "Miss Wilson, will you please," well, it was Miss Welton then, "will you please go and ask Mr. Wilcox to pop down to the office?" So I said, "Yes, sir." And I popped into Stan's room, and of course it was silent and they were working. And I said, "Mr. Burgess wants you at the office, Mr. Wilcox. Would you like me to stay with your class?" He says, "Oh, there's no need." He says, "They won't move." And he put up his hand and he took out his right eye and he put it on the desk. And he said, "It's watching you." And he walked out, and do you know they did? They were petrified of that bloody eye. It was glass. I should have said that, shouldn't I? So my advice is get a Honda 50 and a glass eye. Oh, I got in trouble. I had to go and move the Honda 50 10 minutes after school started, because we don't park things at the bottom of the stairs at a school, so I didn't know that. So yeah, so I learnt a lot there, but it gave me a great career. I've had a wonderful, wonderful time. I worked in the Caribbean for 17 years. Can you believe it? It's absolutely awestruck by the opportunity to do something like that just because you're a teacher. That's wonderful, isn't it? I lived and worked in Qatar and helped to start a school from scratch, and that was the most amazing experience, and it was wonderful. And I've met so many wonderful people on those journeys, and of course since I became a consultant in the year 2000, I've travelled over most of the world visiting places. Of course, all you see is the inside of a school and a few airports. You don't see much else. But at least I can say, oh, I know that airport. I know that airport. So, a fantastic, rich life. And in all those years, 55 years of education, you're seeing constant change. Give me a 5-minute warning, I've no idea what time it is. Do you know, why doesn't a beautiful place like this have a clock there so that the speaker knows how long they've got left? Don't let me go too long, because we've still got 2 teas to do. Oh, is that all? Oh, well, there's no time to tell you any real facts then. I'll just get on with the stories. I just wanted to say we're in a time of great change now, particularly curriculum change, and it is exciting, and it should be exciting. And the thing we all have to do is learn to embrace change, not to be frightened of change, to say, yes, that sounds interesting, let me have a go at it. And I think if you're one of those let me have a go at that people, you have a much happier career than if you're worrying about the next change that's going to come around the corner. Of course, once you've given it a real go, if it doesn't work for you, you don't do it unless someone's forcing you to. But have a go at it, because I would say it's probably only been 50-50, that 50% of the changes have been really good and really powerful, and I've benefited and the children have benefited, and the other 50% the biggest part of the 50% being called spag, were complete and utter waste of time. I mean, the sooner we get rid of your dameship, can you get rid of spag, please? Have you got the authority to wave a wand? We should have said spag to Anne yesterday. Because, you know, I love talking and I love writing. And in all my years as a talker and a writer, I have never found my brain frantically searching for a fronted adverbial to use on the next sentence. Those words just don't ever occur in daily life. They are of no relevance whatsoever. The only reason to learn those words is to pass a spag test. There is no other reason. So I think it's consuming a large part of curriculum time, particularly in Year 6, and taking up bits of brain that some children can't afford to spare. But when change comes along, do embrace it. You know, there's a very famous old saying, isn't there? Just get your teeth stuck in. And I can't give you that advice strongly enough because, you see, I don't have any teeth. Well, I do, but they're plastic. In my 50s, I had a very nasty bout of gum disease, probably alcohol rot, and the dentist just abandoned me. I had 5 abscesses at once in my mouth, and I was working. It was when I was working as an advisor in Kirklees. Some of you know that part of the story. And he said, we'll just have to take them all out. Can't bash on. So I went on a Friday afternoon. I had all my teeth removed. Oh, it was the most traumatic thing I've ever done. You know, I'm walking home from the dentist, and there's blood and other stuff dribbling out of the corners of my mouth. You've got a mouthful of bloody sockets. I'm not swearing there. I'm describing, that's an adjective, not a curse. Not fronted, but there we go. Bloody sockets drobbling as I walked. There you go, that worked, didn't it? On the Sunday afternoon, I was still sitting in my conservatory. I don't have one now, but I had one for 5 years. Dribbling and trying to read a book. And I suddenly became aware, colleagues, that there was a lad standing in my garden, and there was only one way into my garden. He had to have come down the path, past the house, to get into my garden, because it was at the back of the house. And I looked up, and I said, can I help you? When you have your teeth out, they don't leave you with no teeth. They put in some very large, standard, fit anybody teeth, so that they don't rub too much on your gums. So when you're talking, these things are clacking up and down. It's quite disconcerting, because you can't glue them in because you've still got bloody sockets. So I said, can I help you? And he just went... So I said, it's a bit louder. That's the technique we always use, isn't it, when children don't understand us. I said, can I help you? There's nothing wrong with his ears. It was something else, clearly, but he just shook his head again. So I was getting full of despair by now, and I thought, I've had enough of this. I got up, went round to the door, went out onto my steps, stood and looked down at him on my lawn, and said, can I help you? And he just went... And I thought, well, there's something funny here. So I looked the other way, and of course, over the road, sitting in a row on the wall, there was a gang of youths. And I said, are they after you? And he went... And I said, oh, well, don't worry now, I'm here. I can defend you, she said, with bloody stuff trickling out of my mouth, you know. But he just went... So I turned my attention to these youths, and I said, now then, you've had your fun, come on, off you go. And, you know, they just came out with a load of gestures and obscenities. And I said, excuse me, I spoke to you politely. Get off the wall and go and leave this young man alone. You never forget how to teach, do you? So, more gestures. At that moment, round the corner of the bungalow next door, came reinforcements. Jessie and Bill on their Zimmer frames. And Bill had been in the war, you know, and he was very old school about women and being defended. So he jumped in on my, well, he didn't jump, he sort of staggered in on my behalf. But he got even more foul abuse than I'd had. And I just thought, come on, Ros, get a grip. You've taught all over the world. There's no time for this messing about. Get it dealt with. So I went, I said, and my teeth shot down the path. You have never seen a gang of lads. Don't go! You've never seen a gang of lads run so fast in your life. It solved the problem. So how long have I got? 5 minutes. Oh, I'm just going to abandon it. You don't deserve any more. You must wonder what on earth you've come to. But the real message is, if you can have a laugh, if you can make good friends, if you can embrace change, and if you love teaching, which I do, then go for it, because it can last you forever. It is my hobby as well as my work, and I don't think I shall ever stop. The only thing that happens as you get older, you don't lose the ability to teach. You don't lose the ability to think and to plan and all those wonderful things. I'm still working now. I'm writing an international curriculum as we speak. How lucky am I? I love it. I absolutely love it. But the one thing you do lose is the ability to wait when you want to go to the toilet. I look back on all those years in the classroom. How did we manage to only wee twice a day? And always at the same time? How did we do that? I cannot remember in 30 years actually in the classroom, I can't remember ever walking out to go to the toilet. That is phenomenal now, because if I'm just telling my body not to listen to what's coming out of my mouth, because if my body gets a clue I'm talking about weeing, I shall need to wee. And if I need to wee, I have to go. You know, when you get to my age, ladies, I want you to watch this carefully, because this particularly applies to you. You need to practice the walk. It's the I need a wee walk. And it takes a bit of practice. And I've been like this for quite some years now, you know. And it's very difficult because as a consultant, of course, you're driving up and down the country all the time. And there's nothing worse than suddenly deciding you can guarantee if the traffic stops, you immediately need a wee. And all these men get out and do it on the bank at the side. And what are we women supposed to do? I was going north to the Lake District one day to work. I was going up the M6, which once you get north of the M62 is normally quite a good flowing motorway. It's not that busy. Oh, I've got 1 minute. Oh, thank you, there's a lady with a piece of card. You didn't tell me that, did you? I wouldn't have had to keep asking you. You're sacked. Can I say it in a minute? Yes, you can do it. Come on, Ros, gird up your loins. The traffic stopped. All 3 lanes, M6 going north, near to where the motorway turns off to Blackpool. Dead halt. Apparently, some mile further ahead, a lorry had shed its load all over the M1. So we were sat, and we sat, and we sat, and we sat. I was quite amused to see that the car here, I was in the fast lane, the parked fast lane. The car parked here in the middle lane. All of a sudden I noticed there was a little sooty, for those of you old enough to remember, I don't think anyone in here is old enough to remember, waving to me through the window like this. Now there's only one person in the car, and it was a middle-aged gentleman in a suit, and he was staring forward steadfastly while this glove puppet waved to me. Anyway, in the end I waved back, and it sort of rocked with laughter and went down. I can't explain that. I have no idea. There's no point to that story at all, but it just shows that you'll never know what's going to happen. Anyway, all the men started getting out and weeing after we'd been sat there nearly an hour, and I was desperate. And I so wanted to wee, and I thought, I'm going to have to get out and wee on the M1, and you can't do that. And then I thought, I know, have I got anything in the car that I can wee in? And I remembered that I had my laptop case in the boot, and in the laptop case there was an empty toffee tin which I filled with chocolate footballs to throw at teachers when I was running the day, to say, you've scored a goal, you see, and I'd throw a football at them, a chocolate one. And I thought, I can win the toffee tin. So I opened my door and I climbed out, and about 50 windows went down, and all these heads are shouting, are you all right, love? Well, they knew I wasn't, because I'd got the silly walk-ons. So I got to the boot, I got out the toffee tin. No, I didn't. I said, no, I'm fine, I'm just going to get my laptop case and do a bit of work while I'm waiting. So I got the whole case, got back in, put it in the well, got the toffee tin out. You'll be glad to know I tipped the chocolates into the bottom of the laptop case. And now this is the other reason I'm telling you the story. Ladies, again, you've got to start practicing this now. Because to get your trousers down and your knickers down and a toffee tin in the right place, it's quite a skill, and you have to do it all while not moving the upper body so that nobody knows what's going on. But I got that tin in place, and I had the most glorious wee of my life. And I carefully put the lid on the tin, and I put the tin on the passenger seat, and I put my clothing back, and all would have been wonderful if just before I got my knickers back up, the middle row moved forward, and White Van Man was leaning in my window going, yay! Can see you! That toffee tin is in a bin at Lancaster Services. I finished a book recently, and the very last words are, at Lancaster Services there's a bin, and in that bin there is a tin. Don't look in. Thank you all very, very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, Sam. Good friend.
Well, how do you follow that? Oh, so there's hilarious. Okay, thanks very much. Thanks for a fantastic opening to the festival, Roz. I knew you'd pull it off. That's absolutely brilliant, so thank you very much for that. Just a couple more announcements. Just to remind colleagues that we've got a whole series of sessions all the way throughout the day today. There's an awful lot going on. We've got the fantastic musical performances from the Doncaster Youth Swing Band taking place at 12 o'clock. And just a little bit after that as well. This is out on the notice board. One of the things we're doing with them, by the way, is that they're going to be starting to play just before the end of sessions take place. So if you're in a session, and we've asked them that when the session time finishes to get really loud. So if you hear the music get really loud, that's the end of your session time. So please to think of it as a bit like a live school bell. There's lots of toilets and refreshments all the way throughout the building. There's going to be food outside as well, because we had an interesting time yesterday morning about 10:30 thinking, shall we go with the food? Because I don't know if you saw the weather yesterday. It's almost like a Manchester festival rather than a Sheffield-based one. But that cleared up, and the weather forecast is really nice today. So there'll be food just outside the main entrance around about lunchtime, as well as in the kind of main deli bar as well. If anybody's got any questions, we've got all our ambassadors here today, so they're just all primed. They're wearing the kind of, as our Vice Chancellor called it, the custard-coloured shirts, which I must admit had not occurred to me before that, but it does actually fit, and I'm not going to kind of go against his decisions about that. So it just remains for me to say, have a really, really fantastic day. Really, really enjoy it. And next sessions start in a few minutes' time. Thank you very much.
Hey.
and in the Teacher Education Department, but my current role is one of the strand leads for the South Yorkshire Futures programme here at the university. We were delighted yesterday when Dan Jarvis, opening the two-day festival, talked so passionately about the work we're doing for South Yorkshire Futures. It's a project for the university that contributes significantly to our Transforming Life strategy. Our aim being that every child and young person in South Yorkshire has the opportunities that they need and indeed deserve to lead fulfilling and rewarding lives. So the strand of work that I'm responsible for focuses on the middle years, so primary and secondary, with a focus on teacher workforce specifically. And specifically at the moment, we're putting all our energies into teacher recruitment and retention. Fairly topical, I'm sure you'll agree. So we're of the view that in order to address teacher recruitment challenge, we need to focus head on the retention challenge first. I'm sure you won't disagree that the very best, and unfortunately, sometimes the worst advocates for our profession are teachers themselves. So where teachers feel supported and valued, they'll stay even in the most challenging circumstances and the most challenging schools. And I'm sure colleagues here will be able to pick up on this later. What's more, they'll share their joy and passion and promote it as the worthwhile and rewarding profession that we know that new entrants to the profession believe it to be. And of course, where teachers feel they can function well and excel in their work and what they're doing matters, then outcomes for children improve. I think just going to pause for a second just to, hopefully not embarrass, but just to highlight here on Sarah, who's down here on the floor. She sat here all day yesterday producing these amazing pieces of work, and I'm just very aware as she's trying to scribble down what I'm saying, it's the same as yesterday. So some of it is up there more from yesterday, although she did me a Super Sue in a cape, which I'm taking that, I love that. So where teachers feel valued, they will stay. So those of you, though, that subscribe to the John Cleese School of Stating the Bleeding Obvious, you'll be thinking, yes, Sue, that's just common sense, isn't it? If teachers are happy in their environment, they will stay. But as I said yesterday, my dad, who was my greatest, and is still, I should say, my greatest teacher, would say at this point, yes, Susan, because he's the only person allowed to call me Susan, yes, Susan, but the problem with common sense is that it isn't always that common. So, also, of course, what my dad wouldn't go on to say, but I'm going to say, is that what's a great place for me to work isn't necessarily the same for you. What makes a great place for you to work isn't necessarily the same for me. But I think there are some underlying principles, and that's what we're looking at. So in talking around the subject of schools as great places to work, for a moment we're shifting our gaze not on the children and the young people in our schools, but on the teachers. Do we spend enough time ensuring that they are happy in their work, are they fulfilled, and do they find their work satisfying? So, as I said, I can talk for hours on this, but we've invited these eminent guests to tell it from their perspective, and they've been asked to talk what they believe makes schools great places to work. Each will give their views on this, and then hopefully at the end we'll have some questions. We had some really rich and exciting questions and challenges actually yesterday as well. So what I really hope then is that you take this theme with you through the festival and all the other sessions that you go into, but more importantly I hope you take it back into your workplace from whichever perspective you're coming, whether you're a leader or a class teacher or whatever your role is in school, that you take what you hear today back into your settings. Okay, so time for me to stop and time for me to hand over and enjoy, I am sure, listening to, I think we're going to ask Alison to speak first. Thank you, Alison.
Thank you. So I've spent all my career as a teacher, a bit like Roz, although slightly different from Roz in many ways. But I started off in a secondary school, then moved to another secondary school in Leicestershire, then joined the advisory service, then went into primary, worked with special ed. So I've worked across the whole piece, I think, in education. And I know the thing that makes a school a great place to learn for me is that, you know, that time when somebody comes to you and they'll say, guess what? And you say, what? And they say, guess what I've been able to do? And they tell you about something that they have learnt, something they've achieved, something they've tried for the first time, and you say, oh, that's fantastic. And you know that you've had that tiny little bit that has enabled that to happen. And it's not that it's your success, it's their success. But that feeling of sharing in their absolute delight really is at the heart of what it means to be a great teacher. And as you go through your career and you maybe move into leadership roles, then it's not necessarily the children that come and say that to you. Sometimes it's other colleagues that come and say to you, and they say, guess what? And you say, what? And they say, oh, this has happened in my classroom today. And you say, that's amazing, tell me more. And what I'm finding now, having established the Chartered College of Teaching just 2.5 years ago, I was at a conference just a couple of weeks ago for the Church of England, big conference. And this woman came up to me as we were moving between sessions, and she said, "You're Alison Peacock, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Guess what?" I said, "What?" And she said, "Because you've created this journal, we've tried this, we've got this journal club going on in our school. Thank you so much." Now that notion of being able to help someone else achieve their own success, and you know that you're a part of that, is the most wonderful feeling. It really is the most wonderful feeling. Back here, 3 years ago, we had the Beyond Levels Conference, the first Beyond Levels Conference. And that came about because I was on the DFE group at the time looking at assessment. In fact, at the time, I was on pretty much every DFE group that was going. And they'd got this group that were looking at assessment because in our school, we had refused to use levels. We weren't talking about national curriculum levels, and we didn't label our children in school. And that group had decided that it would be a great idea if across the country people shared their models of how they were assessing learning. But what was happening was that nobody had organised that. And although DFE said, yes, that's a great idea, they weren't going to do anything about it. Because this is a so-called school-led system, but actually nobody's leading the school-led system. So I sent a tweet in the February half-term to say, how would it be if we started to share our examples of assessment? Wouldn't this be a good idea? Because everybody was really worried at the time. Levels had gone, and there kind of seemed to be nothing that was emerging in its place. And Nikki Morgan was the Secretary of State of the day, and she sort of said, from a cupboard somewhere in the DFE, she put out this podcast saying everybody just ought to just get on with it, and people didn't know what to do. So I sent this tweet, and then other people started to tweet, and then Sam got involved, and we held an event here 3 years ago in this very lecture theatre. And we had 500 people who came from all over the country. It was Roz's debut in her new role as comedienne, and we had Sean Harford here from Ofsted, and we had loads and loads and loads of people. Shirley Clark, loads of people came to talk about assessment on that day. And I remember at the end of that day, as we were leaving, thinking, oh my goodness, if we can create this kind of energy across the whole country, then we can start to really help teachers in every single school, so that every school can be a great place to work and to learn for our children. So we started the Chartered College of Teaching. And the Chartered College of Teaching is essentially about raising our status, regaining our energy, reminding ourselves of what it means when we do things really well, and sharing that. Not in a kind of bragging, sort of boastful, sort of I think you'll find I'm totally brilliant kind of way, but in a way that is about sharing ideas. So we have the journal, we have events, we have the chartered status, and it's really starting to take off. And this is because we have to have hope, don't we? We have to have hope for our profession. And we can have that within our individual schools, and schools can be really, really tight communities. In fact, they can be such a sort of tight community that you feel like you can't really bear to break out of it and go to something else. But the reality is we need to sort of join all of that up across the system. And where there are schools that are so-called toxic schools, with teachers working in those schools, we need to give those people hope and say, actually, there is another way. So I'm here today to say, look, we're starting to do something amazing. Please join us. Please be part of what we're doing, because we have to believe that everything can only get better, to coin a phrase. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. Matt, would you like to go?
Great. Well, morning, colleagues. It's great to be here today. I'm going to try and follow Alison. So Alison follows. It's going to go bad from the start, but let's see how we get on. I'm going to talk a little bit about teacher well-being. Now, those of you who know me, small number of people in the room, will know that this isn't usual territory for me. I have a real aversion to voodoo and gimmicks. I think they spread around the education system often like wildfire. And this idea of teacher well-being sits sort of squarely in this category of prime territory for attracting voodoo and gimmicks. But it's an incredibly important and incredibly serious thing for us to think about if schools are going to be great places to work. And in the examples that I'm going to give and the points I'm going to make, I will switch between both both schools being great places to work and schools for teachers being great places to work. One of the things I say to my team all the time is that we are just a school. All of the things apply to schools apply to us. We have to think about a curriculum, we have to think about instruction, we have to think about assessment, we have to think about the environment in which we work. So whether you're a school or you're a school for teachers, and there's a mix in the room, I think the points that I'm going to try and make apply to all of us. So a couple of years ago, we applied for some grant funding from a philanthropic organisation called Big Change to do a piece of work looking at teacher wellbeing. Again, my team came to me and said, look, we want to do this thing on teacher wellbeing. I did a little bit of an eye roll. I was expecting what we were going to do is give everybody yoga classes and mindfulness sessions and go wandering around forests and have lots of conversations and quizzes about how good we all feel. But they persisted, they rightly persisted, they pushed hard on this question. And we found a group of teachers, actually teachers in their early career, and did a pretty wide-ranging literature review on this question, and then went just and tried some stuff out. We tried everything out with this group of teachers. We literally took them to mindfulness sessions, we took them to yoga, we wandered them around forests. We did all of those things. Now, it's a pretty small group, so everything that I'm going to say has no quantitative basis, but we were just trying to get under the skin of this question. And the most useful thing that we found, from my perspective, the most useful thing we found through this was a model created by Rachel Dodge and her colleagues. For those of you on Twitter, I tweeted it this morning, so you can follow me on Twitter and you can find the paper. And what they attempted to do was kind of define this question, and they managed to define it in a sufficiently robust way that it caught our attention. And what Rachel and her colleagues say is that well-being is essentially about the equilibrium between the social, psychological, and physical resources that you have and the social, psychological, and physical challenges that you face. Incredibly simple. Again, common sense feels obvious, but it allowed us, this model, to start a conversation about what this looks like in schools and indeed what this looks like in schools for teachers. So the first thing to say from that sentence is the equilibrium word is incredibly important. I think one of the things that we often think about well-being that's pretty obvious is if the resources that you have are less than the challenges that you face, you're going to be in a position of stress, you're not going to be enjoying your work or your wider life, and that's one of the drivers, I think, for the retention challenges that we have in schools. But what the paper also argues is that equilibrium the other way is also problematic. If the resources that you have, the social, the psychological, the physical resources you have, far outweigh the challenges that you face, that can be equally problematic. And so trying to find an equilibrium between those two things where you feel stretched and challenged at work, but have the resources to deal with that stretch and challenge is one of the first points that they make. The second one is about the different types of resources that you need. Both to manage the challenges, so workload, the relationships you might find in your school, the buildings and infrastructure. For those of us who have taught in not building schools for the future schools, don't underestimate some of the physical challenges that are faced from leaky roofs and moving around 15 classrooms in a day. And on the resources side, we're talking about expertise, we're talking about relationships again, and we're also talking about some of the materials that you might have around you as a teacher. And if I think schools are able to try and understand this balance, or school leaders in particular focus their time and energy and effort on this equilibrium, on the two sides of a seesaw as they present it in the paper, I think that gives us a way and a language to use to start making some progress. Internally, we started to use this model, and we talk about it as creating the conditions to do your life's best work. We actually ask this now in interview questions for colleagues that join us. What is it that we need to do as an organisation to help you do your life's best work? Life here, or the split that we try to create between work and your wider life, I think can sometimes become a little bit arbitrary. When we say that to colleagues who join us and when we're working with schools who are looking at this question, That life question needs to have blurred boundaries, in my view. It needs to be a conversation with the people that you're working with about all aspects of the things that are going to allow them to find that equilibrium. If we try to create artificial boundaries between those two things, I think it often gets us on a road to nowhere. So, summary so far, we did a piece of work, a wide-ranging literature review with me as a skeptic from the start. This paper I would really strongly advise you to take a look at and think about this question of equilibrium and the resources and challenges that the teachers and school leaders in your partner schools or your school yourself face. And have a think about this question of your life's best work and how we think about that question in the round without creating artificial separations. A couple of things then just to finish off that I think we're doing as an organisation, and then I hope we're seeing changes in the policy space, partly a result of the recruitment and retention strategy that was published earlier this year. So the first thing that we need to do is think really hard about what this looks like at every level within a school context. Teachers, middle leaders, senior leaders, head teachers, executive leaders. One of the big intellectual challenges that we as an organisation are facing at the moment is that curriculum sequence, right the way from brand new teacher, right the way through to multi-academy trust CEO. We think about this question all the time. When we're in schools, we wouldn't tolerate a maths curriculum that was disjointed or didn't join up from one year to the next. But I do think we tolerate that disjointed curriculum for maths teachers. If we're going to make progress on giving teachers the resources and equipping them with the knowledge and skills they need to address the challenges, we've got to think more about curriculum for educators. And I think that neatly ties up then, and I plug this on every panel that I'm on at the moment, this neatly ties up with the department's work and the attempts that it's making to improve that curriculum sequence at the early part of a teacher's career. I don't think most of the system have clocked yet that in 2 years' time, we're going to try and roll out a national training program for 50,000 newly qualified and early career teachers. This is the single biggest implementation challenge that our system has faced for certainly as long as I've been in it. I will defer to more senior colleagues than me to if they can identify a challenge that has been bigger. By tackling this challenge, particularly at the early career stage, I think what we're doing, back to Rachel Dodge's model, is we are equipping early career teachers with a greater set of resources so that they can address the not insubstantial challenges that they face in their career. So a plug for that, an encouragement to go and read about it and find out some more about it, and come and find either Sam or myself or Alison or anybody else who's working on making sure it's going to be a success. Being piloted in Doncaster. Anybody on the panel, go and grab them, talk to them about it.
Brilliant segue. Thank you so much. So thanks, Alison and Matt, for giving us, an overview and your perspectives on that. It's really fascinating. I've noted down a few points about do your life's best work. Am I doing my life's best work? I think I might be, actually. Yeah. So that's brilliant. So now we're going to absolutely apply it in context into two leaders from our South Yorkshire region. So I think we're going to go to Ian next, who's head teacher at Woodcliff Meadow in Sheffield.
Hi, if you don't know, well, you won't know most of you about anything about Woodcliff Meadow School, but we're a primary school in the north east of Sheffield in an area of fairly high level of challenge. I've been there 12 years now, I think. I went a year before the school opened, and it opened because 3 failing schools, if you like, shut down. We had hundreds of interviews to do in those kind of first term before we started. So I'm going to talk about my recruitment retention strategy. That's what I've come to talk about. I would say, I'll give you an apology to start with. I don't mind public speaking, but I usually get asked to talk about something I feel passionate about, and I get quite emotional sometimes. So if I have to pause for a minute because I'm breaking down, then forgive me. I also can get a bit sweary if I'm feeling cross. I'm not too cross, but I was told to not keep it blue, so I'll try not to.
Rosa set the tone, so anything goes from this point, I think. Yeah.
So in terms of my recruitment strategy is pretty simple. When we opened, I said we did hundreds of interviews, and I got pretty good at them. And I kind of see my interviews, generally we have a set of emotional intelligence weighing scales, not literally, but figuratively, and how people sit on those in terms of their ability to self-reflect, make relationships, all those things are probably the prime thing I recruit around. I also basically tell people if you want to work here, it's bloody hard work. It's really hard work. So don't come to me and say it's hard work, because I've told you that already if you want to work here. I often refer to myself as a benevolent dictator. People think I'm really nice, and I am really nice.
You are really nice.
But if I say we're going to do something, we're going to do that thing, and we're going to do it to the best of our ability with the time and energy we've got, and I expect everybody to do it to the best of their ability with the time and energy they've got. And if we don't, I'm not happy. And what I do say to people when I recruit them is, I am interested in people. My job, I see it, if I was to cut it down to one thing, it would be about the growth and development of people, not just children, but adults as well. So that's my recruitment strategy, and it's worked pretty well, because in the 12 years we've been there, people generally don't leave unless they've got a good reason to, they're moving or something. So it's worked in that sense. The retention bit is what I really want to talk about, because I think in these times, in this day and age, it's more important than ever. So I've kind of developed this over the past, 12 or more years really, and I've started to term it in as 3 pillars. So I'm going to talk about each of those 3 pillars. And I see them as this and the middle. I'm going to talk about, as I see it, the left-hand side first, which is, so I say I'm interested in people. I'm interested in staff as a whole person, because I've always seen it, and we do a lot of what our kind of foundation of what we do is based around Jenny Mosley's model. I know lots of you probably will have heard her talk, and I think it's it is a very bastardized model, because I see and hear people doing bits of it, but actually at the very top of that strategy model is the self-esteem of all children and adults. And I think we all see the value of self-esteem of children, but often we overlook that adults bit. And in my eyes as a leader, I've always seen that if I want the best for the kids in my school, I don't have that much contact time with them. My best route to giving them the best deal possible day in, day out is to look after those people who do that job for me. So I've always seen staff well-being as one of the most important things I do, almost hand in hand with children well-being. So the left-hand pillar is about looking after yourself. So in our appraisal system, I have an expectation that every member of my staff, from catering staff right through to teaching staff, fills in a personal care plan. We call it a SPICE plan. So a SPICE plan is, again, taken from Jenny's model, and she talks about, if you ever heard her talk, she talks about, as a profession, we are very, very bad at just killing ourselves in term time, working ourselves to the bone, and then surviving and getting to holiday and just filling up our wells, as she calls them. So in terms of those wells, what makes us a good overall human, or she terms it the spiritual well, the physical, intellectual, creative and emotional well. Now you can call them different things, but essentially they are the factors that make us good humans, if you like. So for some people that spiritual well will be more important than others, for some people the intellectual one will be, but all of those elements are important. So our SPICE plans, our personal care plans, all those elements are part of it. And I've been doing this ever since I've been at Waterloo, so for 12 years, and I've done lots of it in different ways. What I make people do is write down, and this is important, that they write down what they're going to do all the time, so in term time as well as in holiday times, to look after themselves under those areas. So the emotional well, I think, is one of the key ones, because if you get that right, actually the others are a bit easier, because that's the thing day to day that brings you down. So I make them write it down. Everyone has a buddy, and that buddy can be 2s, 3s, but somebody else who they share that with and is part responsible for making sure they do it. That's essentially how it works. And I get them to think through. So the thing is, if you say, let's say you're going to run 3 times a week, you have to think through, so how? What is it that's going to make you? And that's just kind of the power of habits, really, that, is it putting your shoes by the door? So just to write that down, exactly when, in the morning, and that I've found helps people do it better. It's not perfect, but the thing is, I've got an expectation that my staff write down how they're going to look after themselves, and I can come back to that. So that's the left pillar. The right-hand pillar I'll talk about last, because that's the thing that probably lots of schools do. That's just a kind of around professional development. But I think we've developed something that I feel is I'm really excited about, because we've been doing it like this for the past 3 years, and it works really well. In fact, I'll talk about that now. So the right-hand pillar, the stuff that you do as part of your appraisal, we have kind of whole school targets, individual targets like people do around progress and all that kind of thing. But what we do hand in hand with that, so we have an appraisal meeting like you're supposed to do at the start of the year. But then throughout the year, there's kind of part of that appraisal system is monitoring professional development throughout the year, and it's on 3 levels. So the first 3 levels, 3 aspects, if you like. So the first aspect is every single member of my teaching staff and TA has a mentor, for want of a better word, a coach mentor. And those mentors are assigned to that person, they check in with them, depending on, so NQTs get it every week, not right through the year, and I'll come back to that, but they get it pretty regularly. Some people don't need it as much. And the mentor team meet every half term, and we kind of go through things, and that support can be just simple appraisal targets, how we can have achieved them. It could be around the personal care plan. If, for example, somebody's father is dying of cancer, as we've had this year, well, it could be anything. So that's a really important bit, because that's the bit that gives you support to help you achieve your appraisal well, and that's that one person who's there for you. The second bit is we use IRIS, and we've used that as kind of research groups through the year, so people have some choice over which group, and that might be about what they're interested in or what their professional development targets are, and they kind of meet. We give people time to do that, so there's an expectation that they use that to record themselves, and then they present back to everyone at the end of the year. So that's the second bit. And the third bit, and this is the bit I was worried about, because it's quite intense, and I didn't want it to put people off. I didn't want it to be unmanageable. But essentially, every year group is monitored for English, Maths and wider curriculum for a whole half term throughout the year. So through a whole year, if you're in year 2, you will be monitored for a whole half term on English, could be reading or writing, Maths and the wider curriculum. Now that's quite intense. So what happens is our curriculum leads will meet the year 2 team, whatever it is, at the start of that half term period, agree what the focus is going to be, and then kind of check in with them each week. Myself and my deputy do lesson observations for each one of those things, so we see everyone at least 3 times formally over the year. And throughout that period of monitoring, we go kind of deep into what is it, how there's like coaching, there's team teaching together, there's the observations, and importantly, I think this is the thing that makes it work, is there's a weekly reflection string, we call it. It's just an email set up where you kind of reflect back on how's it going in relation to what you've set. And that in itself has been just made such a difference, because I think what we're very guilty of in the teaching profession is not sitting back and reflecting on what we've done. So it's kind of built in. It is quite intense, but it's really worked. People have found it really supportive. When I was just setting this up, I heard Mary Myatt talk about, and she was talking about high challenge, low threat. And I thought, oh, that's brilliant. That's exactly what we're doing. And that's what it is. It's real high challenge, but low threat. It's really supportive. So that's the kind of standard stuff. But the middle bit, and this is what I get passionate about, because the middle bit is the bit I think people miss, and it's the what are we here for? And I've done stuff with Andy Cope, and if you've ever heard Andy talk about his Doctor of Psychology, but it's all about what makes people effective, I guess. One of his books, Being Brilliant, I can't remember exactly the title, but there's a picture of a circus on the front. It's a really good book if you read it. And he talks about not a smart target, but a huge, unbelievably great goal, a hug. Okay, and what that is a hug is, what do I really want to achieve? What's my purpose here? So this is what I get my staff to do. Why are you here? What do you want to do, and what do you want to achieve in your role as a teacher, as a TA, or as a leader, or whatever? And I get them, so the hug is, at the top, it's the outcome. What's my purpose? And I tell this story to my staff and when I new people to kind of demonstrate what I mean. So the story is a really simple one. A guy walks down the street, there's some building work going on, he gets the first worker he comes across, he says, what are you doing here? And the guy says, well, it's a job, it pays reasonably well, I've got a wife and family to look after, it's great, it works well. He moves on to the next person he comes across. What are you doing here? He says, well, I'm a stonemason, my dad was a stonemason, his dad was a stonemason. It's what I do it really well. So he moves on to the next person, what are you doing here? The guy says, he stands up and says, let me tell you what we're doing here. We're building a temple here. This is going to make an amazing difference to the people of this village and community. People are going to come from far and wide to see what we've done here. So they're the 3 kinds of people we've got in our workforce. And any one person could be a mixture of those. On any day of the week, on any part of the year, you could range from it's just a job to this is my profession, I want to be really good at it, to I understand the purpose and what we're trying to do here. What we want is the people who work for our workforce to know what they're there for, to know the purpose of what we're trying to achieve together and what my part of that is. If we've got that, bloody hell, we've got a good workforce. Now, I've done lots of research on this over the years, and a lot of this came from Daniel Pink's Drive book. If any of you ever read it, essentially it's about the carrot and stick approach, only gets you so far. What really makes people be excellent is an inner drive to be the best they can be. Well, that's my job. That's what I see as the number one thing I do, to make people, children, adults, the best they can possibly be, but for them to have ownership of that and believe, and it be intrinsic. Now, that's not easy, but it's not going to happen if you don't talk about it and you don't say this is how we're going to do it. So the hug is a real practical way how you can say, get people to think, this is what I really want to do, how am I going to get there? So the rest of it is kind of like a pyramid. The bottom bit is what Andy calls your six-pack. And one of the things Andy said when I first heard him talk was, forget to-do list, write a to-be list. When you are at your best, what does it look like? So that's you being your best. So your six-pack is the 6 words that characterise you at your best. Now, having done this with lots of people over several years, what I usually find is it's dead easy to write. It doesn't take very long. You usually struggle with 1 or 2 of them, but actually it's easy. Writing the bit, you know, what you really want to achieve isn't that hard. All then you have to work out is the steps to get there. That's our kind of 3-pillar model. That's how I keep my teachers happy.
Brilliant. I'm just so bad at timekeeping because I can't stop passionate people talking. So but that's a fantastic. Helen, follow that. Thank you.
Well, first of all, I'm absolutely delighted to be here. And I would have loved to have been here yesterday, but I was fulfilling one of my statutory roles as a head teacher around safeguarding. So Year 11 had finished their exams yesterday. We had some shirt signing, and I was hiding in a lane, confiscating about 200 eggs. I fell in some nettles, and so I was feeling a bit stung yesterday, and even more so the fact that I couldn't be here. But by telling you that story, I think what I need to convey to you, the way I keep my staff, is around the human dimension. It's about having fun. I was with my leadership team. Some of our boys do keep us busy in Year 11. It's mainly our boys, actually. What they thought was fun, we thought was a bit of anarchy, really. But by pulling together and staff working together, those students had a fantastic last day. And as they left their last exam and staff applauded them on the way out, I could feel, you know, it was really palpable, the pride that my staff have in delivering the best education for young people. I didn't start off as a teacher. I started off, and I don't really like the word, as an accountant. I grew up in a generation where people used to say, if you teach, you can't really do. And I bought into that myth, actually, and I was absolutely adamant I would never be a teacher. But there was a burning desire in me, and I remember training to be an accountant. I could leave the spreadsheets, I could leave the numbers, but what I loved was coaching people, being with people. And so after about 6 or 7 years, I decided I would go into teaching. I did train in some of the most challenging schools in Nottinghamshire, in Rotherham. It's quite a good place to end my career, in a high-performing school with very, very supportive parents and students that are absolutely amazing and don't need that same level of intervention around behaviour management. So what I want to talk to you about really is that journey. I'll try and keep it brief, but pull out some of the things that I've learned and shape my practice in my current school. So I think it was about day 3 of teaching, we had an Ofsted inspection, and being in a very challenging school, I hadn't really got to grips with behaviour management. And I remember the deputy head putting the head round the door and saying, they're here, they're coming, be ready. And I thought, oh my goodness, I'm going to be observed at day 3 of being a teacher. And I looked around and I couldn't see any paper. And I thought, oh goodness, I'm not well organised. But there was a cupboard behind me. So I went in to get the paper. And surprise, surprise, I couldn't get out of the cupboard. I was locked in. And I remember peering through the keyhole thinking, oh my God, what am I going to do?
Is that really what you said? Is it really?
I didn't dare bang on the door because I thought, well, the Ofsted inspector will know I'm in here. So I decided, I started whispering loudly through, and there was a nice child who smiled at me, and I was saying, the door has locked, the door has locked. And eventually, after 5 minutes, they let me out. My feedback for that lesson was I had potential. And I held on to that because what I learnt in my first 3 years of teaching, I'd done my PGC at Sheffield University, I'd had great support, but as colleagues have said today, I didn't know what I didn't know, and it was the hardest 3 years of my life. I'd love to say that as a head, it gets easier, but actually it is a profession that demands so much of you, but actually it has stretched me intellectually and taken me to places that I never knew existed. And I think the teachers we recruit, the best teachers, need to understand that message, that if you want a career, if you want to be very much involved in your own self-actualization, if you want to shape yourself and give yourself opportunities and your students, then teaching is the most amazing place to be. And even though I'm a head teacher and I run a very busy school and I'm very often bogged down in the operational side of things, I never forget that I am a teacher. The way I keep staff, I believe, is we've talked about giving staff empowerment and ownership, and I think that's really, really important. So people who come into my school, there is a really high expectation that from day one, they may be learning, but they are also leading at the same time, and that's really important. It's really important that they feel we treat them as professionals. Hunger Hill School, we talk about it being a family, and when people come in, they say there's a real warmth in the school. And there is a warmth because the leadership team, and I model this all the time, we listen. We listen to staff. It's really, really important that we understand what their challenges are, and that we don't forget as a leadership team, actually, the day-to-day grind sometimes of being in the classroom. And what we've tried to do is create a number of really fantastic professional development opportunities. So one thing that we have done in the last 3 or 4 years, we became a teaching school. Now I believe every school should be a teaching school. We get the meagre sum of £40,000 a year. But actually, and it made me reflect why we weren't doing it sooner, that £40,000 has opened so many doors. But that £40,000 was already in a secondary budget of nearly £6 million. So the question I ask myself is, why isn't every school a teaching school? So this is what it looks like for you. So year 1, people come to us, and When we appoint them, there's a really fantastic professional development programme built around individual needs. There's a generic programme, but we really personalise it. And we don't make young teachers feel bad that they need on-call. We don't make them feel, we don't monitor how many on-calls they've had and then make a judgment about those teachers. Well, you're not very good at behaviour, are you? Is what it says. So what we do, we make sure that we front load all the things that young people need coming into the profession. And by year 2, they're actually undertaking quite a lot of mini research projects in their school. We let them shine. Just like you do young people and children, we make sure the teachers that come to us shine. And that's really, really important, that they feel recognised, because it goes back to the intrinsic motivation that we want. And to give you an example, the new GCSEs are really, really tough. And my science department were really worried about the less able. And so one of the things, a young teacher came to see me and said, this class, I really am struggling with them. I need some help. So we went and watched. And we said, we think you've pitched the work a little bit too hard. But we haven't got all the answers for you. And I think that person was looking for all the answers. And what we helped them do was to discover the answers for themselves. And that's really important. And actually, what they did, they looked at some of the larger questions in science. And they said, how do I get these children who are so vulnerable to develop that resilience? But they developed over a period of a term in year 2 of teaching the answer to that question. And they shared that, and they shared it with governors. And then we opened out our school to other schools in Doncaster, and we had a teach meet. And it was absolutely brilliant. Teachers allowed to express their anxieties, but also to actually get loads of feedback and positive ideas, because that's the next thing. How do you constantly create energy in a school when you feel absolutely submerged with change all the time? And it is exhausting. It is absolutely exhausting. So my challenges ahead is to make sure I carry the burden of that as far as I possibly can. My leadership team do. We have to. And what we do in doing that, in creating space, we actually give our professionals the time to grow. So year 3, by year 3, they become specialist leaders of education, year 3 and 4. Most of you sitting here, if you teach, you joined because you wanted to make a difference. And doing so, you want to help other people. I want to help teachers grow. I want to help my teachers help children grow. And it's a very simple formula. So by allowing them to help teachers, this is what happens. It's fascinating. There's a sense of pride in a teacher, and most of us don't like to think, if we're helping somebody, that we're going to give them poor advice. So by allowing a teacher to help others, they invest in themselves. And sometimes I've seen a teacher being directed into another school, another department, and say, can you help them on assessment? And this is what happens, and I'm going to finish here. They read, they invest in themselves, they trial strategies in their own classroom, and they become experts to help other people. It's a very simple formula, but it works. Thank you.
Thank you, Hallam. Thanks so much. So I'm sure you'll agree, we've heard a range of different perspectives. Adam, don't just leave the room for a moment. If we've got any Doncaster teachers in the schools, and very well we've got leaders talking passion here, but I just saw you escaping and I'm not going to let you escape. If we've got any Doncaster teachers in the room, we want to hear from Doncaster teachers. We want to know about what you think about schools as great places to work. And we're doing an innovative research project, so Adam's going to be on the first floor at the South Yorkshire Future Stand, so if you have got a bit of time today to talk to us, we'd really, really appreciate that. Okay, so like I said, I'm a bad timekeeper because I can't stop people talking about things that I really care about. I can't cut them off. So, but we can take some questions. Has anybody got any questions or comments or threads that they want to pick up from yesterday? I can see some people were in here yesterday. Don't be shy. That was the moment before somebody puts hands up. Brilliant, I'm saved. Somebody's got their hand up. Would you like to say who you are? There's a microphone comment. If you'd like to say who you are and where you're from, that'd be fantastic. Thank you.
I'm Pippa Lord from the National Foundation for Educational Research, NFER. Thank you all for your really brilliant contributions. I've got a question for Matt. I was really interested in your sort of equilibrium issue, and I wondered, how does teacher autonomy fit into that equilibrium?
So I've actually made a little note on my card about autonomy. Something I think about a lot, particularly because it became a very popular term around 2010 when we decided the thing that everybody needed was lots of autonomy, and it was all about autonomy for schools. I come at this question, I suppose, with like I do lots of these questions, with just what would I do in my classroom, and I think what we know, and I think what the literature tells us, is for people at the intermediate and expert levels of performance, an instructional method, broadly described, that is about autonomy tends to be pretty effective. If you're trying to help someone get better and that person already is pretty proficient at what it is that they're doing, one of the best things that you can do for them is give them lots of space to experiment and trial and do different things. I think sometimes where we fall down as a profession is we forget that autonomy isn't particularly effective as a method of instruction for novice to intermediate performers. And because what we're trying to do is well-intentioned and we're trying to create a sense of profession in the wider body of teachers, I think sometimes we are at risk of rushing too quickly to giving teachers lots of autonomy because we're worried about their self-esteem and their professional identity. And the consequence of that is the psychological resources, as the model would say, like their competency and their expertise, doesn't progress as quickly as it might otherwise do with a more guided or more direct instruction approach. So I wouldn't give autonomy to 6-year-olds learning their times tables. I would teach that to them pretty directly because I think the literature is pretty strong that direct instruction for novices is more effective. So the challenge then comes when you move up the leadership track, because I think the other mistake that we sometimes make is thinking that because somebody is now a middle leader and they were a high-performing teacher, they are necessarily now a high-performing middle leader. They've got used to autonomy as a teacher, they become a middle leader, and so we continue with that method of instruction as the most effective way to develop them. And in fact, I think what's happening is they've entered a new domain, they're learning new content, new knowledge, new skills, new behaviours, and actually what we need to do is switch back to a more guided and direct instruction approach. So the question for me is always, like, what level of proficiency is this person at in the domain in which they're working? Like we would do when we were a teacher, we would take a look at the kids and go, where are they at? And then we would choose the method of instruction that was most likely to be effective for the level of proficiency that they're currently at. So I push back often against what we need is loads of autonomy for the profession as a whole, because I think that's actually really problematic. And Alison's assessment example is a great one. Right? What we said is, what we need is loads of autonomy for teachers. Let's let everybody design their own assessment system. Well, like, assessment's really hard, right? Like there's tons and tons to learn about what a great assessment looks like and how to design a formative and summative assessment system for your school that's really effective. I'm pretty sure that, like, insert random small school X in Northumbria with 3 teachers, like, it's a pretty tall order for them to design and invent that for themselves. What we did was we gave them lots of autonomy, and actually it meant that the resources that they have compared to the challenges that they face were off, the equilibrium was wrong, and we get ourselves into more trouble. So autonomy is a method of instruction. We should choose it when it is appropriate for the level of proficiency with the individual that we're working with and trying to develop in the moment.
Thanks, brilliant answer. Alison?
Can I just say, though, that I think teacher agency is different. And I think, you know, it's really important that wherever you are in your career, you have a sense of agency, that you have a sense that you are in control, because the opposite leads to that sort of learned helplessness that constantly waits for someone else. And we know that we need a profession that is buoyant and full of ideas, and you know, so yes, we need the support at different periods in our career, of course, and different types of support, but I always think teacher agency links with student agency actually is a fundamental way of learning. The fact that you know that you will be heard and your ideas will be valued. They may not always be followed, but agency is a very powerful counter to that.
Really good point, thank you. Thanks, Alison. Yes?
Sometimes you've got to be very, very careful, and particularly...
It doesn't need the microphone.
When you think about the work, you know, on emotional intelligence, on what does bring through to teacher agency, that you don't significantly confuse teacher autonomy with going it alone. Because you can create teacher autonomy, but still have unified ways through. And I think we are making some radical mistakes, because I think the evidence is quite clear, being written by Goldman, loads of people, full and everybody through. I can never remember who's quoted anything over the years. But actually, if we continue to work in a world where we think you can't have autonomy because you've got to be told what to do, or it seems to come across in that way, we're actually in dangerous territory, and we're actually not there, we're not really then working on genuine teacher well-being, genuine autonomy to make the decisions within a sort of structured framework or whatever else. So I hope I misunderstand what you're actually saying, but if I don't, I do disagree.
Maybe we disagree. So I don't think it. I don't think it follows that because you are being guided in your development that that necessarily follows that you are constrained or patronised or any of those things that would make you feel like you had no agency. But I do think I think that we have fallen prey to, and certainly when I trained, this was the approach that was taken. The sort of the moment that I landed in my classroom, the thing that was most important that people impressed on me was that I was this autonomous professional. I didn't really know what I was doing, and what I didn't want in that moment was lots of autonomy. What I wanted was lots of support and lots of structure. And I was very fortunate. I had a great mentor who provided lots of that. But let me maybe give you an example which I think will maybe bridge the gap. What?
The examples back to the contradict.
Yeah, sure.
The Parklands in Leeds, St Catherine's in Sheffield, lots of them that actually do it in a different way. So what I'm saying is, what I'm actually prepared to accept is yours is a way. It's not the way.
Sure. Look, we do, and the approach that I'm advocating is what we talk about internally is like the best bet that I would make given the situation. I think one of the great examples is so one of the things that I don't think is helpful, for example, is providing teachers, early career teachers, with off-the-shelf, here are all your curriculum materials. I think that's a great example of not giving anybody any agency, and I think it's a great example of not preparing things in a way that help people develop over time. What I do think, however, is helpful is providing resources that are designed in a way that gradually, over time, wean teachers off the need for things to be provided for them so that they can increasingly do them for themselves. And the thing that worries me is rushing to, with good intentions, we're wanting to get to this endpoint, rushing to it too quickly. I think a slower, more measured, more thoughtful approach that says to somebody, it's going to take you a long time to learn to do this incredibly difficult, complex thing, which is essentially about learning how to think about the thinking of 30 small other humans simultaneously for 20 hours a week. It's really, really hard. It's going to take a really long time to get there, and we're going to give you all of the help and support we can over the years that it will take to do that.
Okay, this is great. You come to Yorkshire, you get straight talking, that's fantastic. Helen, I'm just going to take another question from over here, but I can come back to you. It is the debate stage, so...
I didn't really want to speak today, but I'm Mr. Mohammed, and I'm a primary teacher. And I've been a primary teacher for 29 years in Sheffield, my home city, and London, and I've worked in international schools as well, and in Afghanistan. But I was a welder and I lost my job during the miners' strike, became a teacher when I was 30. Now in 29 years as a teacher, and I'm linking diversity here to retention, I've not come across another Mr. Mohammed in 29 years in primary education. I want to throw that back to you and answer that question. Why are we not recruiting teachers? I did some tutoring at Sheffield University a couple of years ago, and there were no BAME primary teachers. There is no one coming through. I'm from Attercliffe and Darnell, where I've taught. I live in Tottenham and so on. I've been to Nether Edge, Parsons Cross. I am the only Mr. Mohammed. I need a friend. Yeah.
Don't we all? Yeah. Absolutely. And thank you so much for making that point. It was something that was picked up on, like I say, on the same panel yesterday. Samina was here talking about exactly that in terms of representation, both of women at different levels in teaching, but also of BME and how disproportionate it is between the population of the children in our schools and the population of the teachers and leaders in our schools. Does anyone on the panel want to respond to that, Matt?
Just to give you so two things. This was a really important topic in the DFE's group on recruitment and retention. Sam and I spoke about this a lot. We took the department to Diversity Ed, which was a conference that was running in January, to have conversations about how we address this problem. I'll give you a little bit of hope to leave with. And this year, the number of BME teachers joining initial teacher training, I think the figure was 18% of the total, which is going to take a while to come through the system, but stick with the system, because I think some good steps have been made, but there certainly is loads more to do. And my big fear in that strategy is we're not thinking about it. It is a pool of great, talented, expert people who could join the profession, who not only will look and sound and understand the pupils in our schools, but also have to be part of the solution. We're going to be 40,000 teachers short by 2023. If we don't start to look in different places for new great people to join the profession, we're going to be in trouble.
Okay, and that's a perfect segue for me because, Mr. Mohammed, thank you for putting your head above the parapet. So I'm going to throw a direct invitation to you. So one of the big parts of my job is the teacher recruitment events for South Yorkshire that we're hosting throughout the year. And we're taking quite a different approach to that. And one of the things we're doing specifically is putting teachers, actual teachers, in front of the people that come and they're thinking about teaching, to enthuse and to talk about the profession. So please don't leave the room until I've got your details, because I'd love you to come and talk to our future teachers, because this is exactly it. What we say is we want the people that are thinking about coming to profession, seeing people on the stage that say, that could be me, I could be that teacher. And until we get people like yourself representing groups, diverse groups, then we're on hiding to nothing. So I'd love you to come along and join us on that event, please. Okay. Of course you can say no, but all these people have heard you now, so... Yeah, okay, well, we'll find you some friends. That's great. Okay, we are over time, but I will still take a question if there's any burning questions. But as I said at the start, what I'd really love is for these conversations to carry on outside of this lecture theatre and throughout all the sessions you do today. Pick up on all the themes of autonomy, of agency, of doing your life's best work. That one's going to go with me today. And certainly the spy things that Ian was talking about in terms of the emotional aspects of that is something very close to my heart as well. So thank you very much. You've been a fantastic audience, as they say, and I do hope you enjoy the rest of the festival. Thank you.
colleagues of yours got to that point where they've either had to leave or they have got to a terrible situation?
Yeah, it is a big problem. I think it's a big problem for students. I think it's a big problem for teachers, and it seems in the time I've been teaching to become an increasing problem. I think there are lots of reasons for that.
There's my follow-up. What's causing this? Because it is
Yeah, I could give a good news story to that, 'cause obviously here at Hallam we train 1890 on an annual basis science teachers out into the profession, and obviously some don't stay, most do, but our ambition is to send them out with, we were talking earlier on actually about agency, and to answer Gareth's, well, both questions in a sense. We've got an opportunity at the moment, there's an appetite there for curriculum review. We've got specifications that are trying to do one job, and whatever teachers do with a slightly more licence, sometimes it's reconfined again then by an interpretation of what we think. So exams kind of interpret it one way and force something upon us. But actually teachers have a lot more agency than sometimes we allow ourselves to believe. And we try, in the course of our year, or actually because we've got this undergraduate route, our 3 years, to give our students a sort of critical eye, to be aware of the landscape, but actually to feel, there are things, even within a difficult, what can seem to be a difficult landscape, there are things that we can do, so to try and build within them that resilience and that sense of ownership, and the creativity, I think is a word that I think is really crucial to me, to try and go out there and do what they can do in their own classrooms, but actually then to inspire their young people and work with colleagues, because actually you kind of have to stay in it to be able to change it. And I understand it's not for everybody, and it's individual decisions that have got to be made, but the teaching profession as a whole, the science teaching profession, are part of that system and part of what we can do to make it change. So we've got to give people the confidence and the resilience and the freedom to be what they want to be in their own classrooms, because it's actually, that is the important relationship. You with your pupils in your classrooms, inspiring that generation and supporting each other actually as a profession, as a group of science professionals to do that. And that's a lot of what we're about here. So beyond those early years to actually do that. Yeah. Despite the system that's out there, because we have got that inbuilt passion for our subjects and for what we do and for the young people we teach.
I'd like to come back to your question actually in a moment, because I think it's a really good follow-up to this, but other panel members first to answer Emily's question. Richard.
Emily's question, the thing that keeps me going is the passion of the people I meet for education, the commitment of teachers to doing the best they can for their children, and I think that's particularly strong amongst science teachers. So the teachers I work with within the ASE and running courses for teachers and so on, I'm always struck by the way they want to improve and to do things better and to find a way of engaging their students and enthusing them about science. And that passion for science doesn't seem to dry up, even if it's centuries like me since they were ever in any institution teaching them science. Passionate teachers will make the changes that we need, I think, in the future, and we need to encourage them.
Louise?
So for me, I think the thing that I would want to keep and that I admire in teachers is actually their resilience and their reflectiveness. And what seems to be happening more and more in education now is that they're using much more research to inform their practice and become more evidence informed, and rather than going on a whim. And I like that. There is also a downside of that sometimes people think they've got some research and actually maybe they haven't. But it's a good, positive step. I'd love to nurture that and celebrate it. And that links in with the passion as well. And I was lucky enough last week to be with over 450 really super enthusiastic primary teachers of science. Oh, it was wonderful. Absolutely wonderful.
Brilliant.
And I'd stand up for the secondary teachers because I think they're equally passionate.
Well, they are, but this was a primary science conference, so I would have been surprised if they'd been there.
Okay. When you see that, it's energising, isn't it? It's great.
It's amazing. It's wonderful. It just lifts your heart.
Yeah. Jeff?
I was just musing, I think. From my perspective, certainly in the last few years, we've seen, or I believe I felt more grounding from industry starting. And I'd like to see more of that. I've never seen people trying to do education badly, but I've seen industry not understanding how to put themselves across. And going back to some of your conversation about things like the gender balance, and for me also the world of sustainability, which includes diversity and inclusion, I think we've taken some big steps forward in the last 3 to 5 years. I hadn't realised what state some of industry was in until we started going out talking about what we do as normal practice in our organisation. We're not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but actually there's lots that industry can learn from education, and those two worlds have got to talk to each other. So I'd like to see more crossover. I think there's plenty of room for that as well. We can learn from each other quite happily.
Again, can I throw it back to you? Is there one thing?
What would I keep?
Mm.
So, it's quite hard to answer, isn't it? I think I'm of the view that taking an appreciative approach to identifying what's working and do more of that is a more helpful way to think about changing the world than saying everything's bad and we need to start all over again.
Sure.
So that's what I'm interested in. That's what I'm interested in hearing other people's views of actually. Like, can we identify pockets of things that are going well? You know, like what BASF do, and say, okay, let's support other people to do more things like that. Seems like a helpful way to move things forward. If I had to pick one thing, I think what Louise said, I totally agree with. Is we're in a really interesting place in terms of people, teachers, using evidence and gathering evidence of them for themselves now. That is, I think, is starting to really shift how things work in schools. So, yeah, that would be the one thing, I guess.
Makes sense. I do want to come back to you now. Can you just reiterate that question again, because I think it's important. I think you asked Jeremy what was causing the lack of well-being or the issues in schools. It was something.
It would take too long to explain. I guess the best way to describe it is that I just gradually got ground out by it, to be honest with you. Increasing workload. I was working at a public sector school, where a change of head, and the new head was awful, is awful, is potentially now facing disciplinary proceedings for bullying staff. So I'm not just giving an opinion, it's kind of, he's not getting away with it anymore. So I left that school, I went into the private sector, and that was even worse. The workload was even higher. I come from a different background, I felt isolated. I didn't feel welcome, I didn't feel like I fit in. And I was actually bullied, basically. And in the end, I did my first lesson of a 7-period day. They had 7-period days, 7 50-minute lessons. And I got to the end of that first lesson, I sat down and I thought, I've got to go home. I cannot face this.
Mm-hmm.
And I did. I went to see my head of science, I said, I'm mentally compromised, I've got to go home. And I did, and I ended up leaving.
Well, hopefully, that's an isolated issue. I don't know whether it is or not. I don't know whether anybody wants to respond.
I think one thing really quickly. I've seen this happen to loads and loads of people in my career, and I always thought it would never be me, and it never is until it is. You don't see it coming.
I think the profession is beginning to recognise some of that, and in the last 18 months even, the workload agenda. There's a talk this morning again about not being tokenistic about that, but there's a genuine acceptance of the well-being of teachers, of pupils actually. It's a teaching thing, it's a society thing, but there's conversation about that, there's recognition of that, there's work towards that, so we're certainly feeding into our courses to look at the social and emotional well-being of our people as they train, but also setting them up for that social and emotional well-being. That's not to say we put those things in place because the profession, we put those things in place because we are also trying to address those issues in the profession. So I think we've got to be optimistic about that recognition and what's going forward. I do also think actually that science has been particularly hard hit by some of those agendas, because I think it is a particularly demanding, we can possibly say that, particularly demanding. But with that demand comes those rewards, and I think that's what the messages we need to give. That yes, there will be perhaps more than isolated cases, but it's not it is equally still not the majority, and there are people out there that are doing, say, working together and trying to address some of these concerns in the profession. We've got to start from a position of actually, yes, we recognise, we acknowledge, what can we do about it? And I think there is at the moment an agenda or a feeling that there's a recognition that there is something that we can do about it going forward. So let's it's a step in the right direction at this point. It will be my view on that. But again, we're all any of us involved in science education, teacher education, STEM education has got to work together to force that agenda.
I really like that one of the big strands for this festival is not just great places to learn, but great places to work. I think there's been a number of the talks that I've been to which I think really highlight this issue. And one of the comments yesterday, I think it was it Johnny Utley mentioned, basically said that teachers are under the most incredible accountability of almost any teachers in the UK compared to elsewhere in the world. And yet we have almost no autonomy. And that's what's causing that stress, the fact that I know that in a lesson I am effectively mentally and physically, not literally, but metaphorically juggling a million balls at once. I'm going to get something wrong, I'm going to do something wrong, I'm going to make a mistake. I'm not going to be a massive mistake, I'm not going to get sacked for it. But I know that if I make that mistake in some schools, the head teacher will come to me and say, you've done this wrong. Now, the way they've done that, is it blaming, or is it just reminding, or is it encouraging and saying, you're doing everything else great, just work on this one area? I'm in a school at the moment where I feel if I make that mistake, I am blamed, and that's why I'm leaving that school, because I don't feel trusted. And I think that's where the accountability has gone too far the other way. I think autonomy is incredibly important. I think if I have creative freedom in how I deliver, as long as I'm delivering that item at the specification, if I've got freedom in how I choose to do it, that makes me happy. And I think autonomy is really important.
Anyone else? Jeff?
With all deference to your experience, which I can't speak of the world of education at all, I don't think it's an educational issue. I think it's a societal issue. I think part of the problem is actually the prescriptive nature of the world in which many of us exist and live. From a business perspective, part of the conversation starts with giving people autonomy and actually saying, I want you to get to that end point, but I'm not going to be completely prescriptive about how you get there, because your way may be different to my way, but the important thing is we all kind of get to the end point at roughly the same challenge. The other part of it for me is the whole idea of enriching, and I don't actually know what that means to you or possibly to me. I've just launched our first corporate choir in the business because there was enough colleagues said they'd like to do something. So we've now got a corporate choir. We have an annual bakery competition in one of our offices. Part of it is to make people happy, whatever that means. And we're all very, very different as what that means to us. Some of us require more prescription than others. Some of us require a little bit more stress than others. We're all different, but for me it's all about, do we get to where we want to be? And it's allowing people the freedom. De Bono wrote a book a lot of years ago called The Happiness Purpose, and it's a really idle challenge to the fact that why do we insist on setting minuscule targets? Just let people free. We've always kind of managed as a species. I think it'd be a starting point, really.
Richard?
I think the problem of teacher retention is particularly acute in science, more so than other subject teachers. I don't know what the reasons for that are, but we're talking with Sarah from the Chartered College of Teaching this morning. She was saying that it doesn't appear there's any evidence to suggest that teachers are not willing to work long hours if they feel that what they're doing is contributing towards the education of children. What does upset them is when they're working long hours doing bureaucratic tasks that appear to have no purpose. And so I think there's a job to be done in terms of enabling leaders in schools to perform at a higher level and be more acute, more aware of the pressures that put people under, and be less responsive to latest whims to collect data. And I'm hoping that people like Ofsted who are talking about we don't want to see your data anymore, I hope that washes down and causes schools to be a little bit more relaxed. But it seems to take a long time for these things to improve for the better, but a relatively short time for the rumours to get round that you all have to do this in order to get a good grade, and everybody jumps on a bandwagon without really understanding what it's about. So it's with a tinge of sorrow that the ASC has produced a resource called Science Teacher SOS to try and help teachers who are in that position of thinking, this career is not for me, and to show them that there are other ways and things they can do in order to improve their situation before they decide that they have to move to a different career. And the department has been interested in seeing if we can apply that to other subject areas too. So the problem is becoming recognised, the causes perhaps less so.
Louise, there's a bit of a mismatch in the message you've just given us about these positive, enthusiastic 400 teachers, you know, and then we get to this.
Yeah, so those enthusiastic 450 teachers were enthusiastic because they felt invested in, and I think that is really, really important. And they felt invested in because they were allowed to come away to a conference over 3 days in Edinburgh. For many of them, that was a 4-day thing because they actually had to travel from quite a distance. And I think it comes down to that culture within your school and what matters to you. So I'm going to say, if we want to address some of that retention issue, it is about our school culture as well. Now, I have been a head teacher, and I have seen the pressures on my staff, and I've cried with them, I've laughed with them, I've done all of those things with them, and I agree that society demands a lot of us as teachers and a lot of us as schools, but the mental health issue is something that is societal wide as well. And I think it's something we all have to be honest about and open about and say it can happen to any of us, and we need to be there to support each other and listen. And I think it would be, I don't know how we can fit it in because we're all too busy, but I think we also need that opportunity to recognise the symptoms and the signs and be able to openly talk about things that maybe in our school are causing pressures, and for staff to come together and try and solve them honestly and openly. But it's not going to be something you can solve overnight, just as it's not going to be something you can solve mental health problems and issues overnight. It's something that as a society we need to agree and come together on.
Yeah, I agree entirely. Emily?
Just respond back to Jeremy's making me think. He said one of the strands of the festival is schools as great places to work, and we've been thinking about that a lot as well. So we think a lot about individual teachers, and we've started to think about the notion of schools as employers. Although we're very attached to the notion of a school in education, and it carries a great weight, this idea of I work in a school and I'm very part of that school. What we have, I think in education we have a lot to learn from businesses actually. So the things you're describing, Jeff, around the kind of stuff that's going on in a business, and I'm not saying schools should be more business-like, I don't mean that, but I don't think we've ever really stopped to think until we start to think now around actually this is an organisation that's employing people, and we are the employers of these people, and therefore we have a duty of care around their work and their working environment. And actually there's a lot to learn. I think it's a two-way process, isn't it, between education and business, but actually looking at the way teachers are employed, I think there's a lot we can learn there from businesses, and that's what we're starting to do with this, thinking about what makes a school a great place to work as opposed to an adequate place or unbearable place to work.
Or just focusing on the pupils. I think they're obviously incredibly important, but I think focusing on the employees of the school.
Exactly that. Yeah.
Interesting. You know me as a Manchester United fanatic.
How long was it? Wait, what?
I will keep this short. One of the big things that I used to like about Alex Ferguson was he always referred to the United family in terms of playing football, in terms of doing the business, bringing sponsorships in, managing those 11 kids on the football pitch, and it was always about the United family. And that he would speak to the tea lady, the kids who were cleaning the boots, fans, everybody, and it did bring about that feel, that ownership, that I contribute to this club. And I think if we could get schools to do that, and businesses in general, schools, any organisation, that's got to be a positive way. It doesn't always happen, and certainly not in your case.
Described itself as a family. Unfortunately, it turned out to be a bit of a dysfunctional family.
Yes. Yeah. Well, my foot's dysfunctional now.
At the moment, schools that do that and look after each other and don't allow people to get isolated. And actually, if they see somebody's not quite the best, somebody will just take them to one side and say, "Are you okay?" It's not rocket science. I think you would solve a lot of problems if schools had that as part of their ethos and the way of being. And I think it's, I mean, like I say, I was in education for 13 years. Now, and I worked hard for 13 years. I had stress, I had challenges. But it was only when I felt isolated and unsupported that it became, I got to the point where I thought, you know what, I've had enough of this.
Can I just come back on that? So I'm going to say that in my school we really did have that, but there was one thing we neglected, and that was who supports the head teacher.
Yeah, of course.
That's a really good point. I'm going to bring us on track because we've gone on to football and wider educational issues, I think. And the question is, what is STEM education? Are there any more questions?
No. So Jim Weston is currently still physics lecturer at the funny place up the road. I find a lot that when I talk to people about the physics I do and the physics I've done in the past, they get quite excited as adults about, oh, you know, why did I not pay more attention to this? You know, they'll watch a Brian Cox program and ask me questions, go, why did I not get into this at school? Do you think we run the danger that with STEM education at the moment, we very much expect everybody to have that interest in science in this time frame? And if you don't have it in this time frame, that's it. So if you're not interested in physics at 14, that's your chance.
Can I to that? Because I think that comes back to what we call, I'll use physics as an example. You could equally replace biology, chemistry, maths. So that's just the kind of tribalism that we're talking about, sort of the rival that we build up between our subjects. And I wonder, there's a question actually that we talked about earlier on, when is it too late to specialise and have that identity? So I'm just sort of think, if we lower down the school are telling the story of science and making those interconnections, lose the tribes, or at least understand each other's tribes and acknowledge each other's tribes and try and allow our tribe to break down those barriers visibly with our pupils about where we, that story. So if our earlier science was around that storytelling of science, so whether that is sustainability or whatever it happens, it's the science of our times, and we pinged our science off, when does it then become too late to bring in the disciplines of our individual sciences which we do require in order to do that thing that we can tell the stories about, if you see what I mean, if that makes any sense at all. And that's just what made you think there. So yes, is it what we think we need our subjects to be at age 14 that, as we've talked about, gets it, sort of pulls it out of them? So at primary school, probably have got that interest. A primary school kid watching Brian Cox about the planets, they're probably absolutely fascinated. That is not going to happen. You know, to GCSE, that fascination goes because we are not doing that to them at that point. We are drilling them. They have to learn their equations. They have to apply those equations. They have to commit it to short-term memory and then into long-term memory. And that is the way that we are working with them for probably 5 years during secondary school. And then when they're free again to understand those stories, the interest re-sparks. So if I could change anything possibly about it, it would be to understand each other's tribes a lot more and tell more stories about science lower down, and then to do that specialisation later. And then maybe we might sustain that interest so that they would ask those questions and be fascinated. And it probably not to go, and that would be my answer to that.
The irony is actually that in our post-grad areas, our biggest successes are interdepartmental exchanges.
Of course.
You know, where we're doing what we call the Imagine Centre, where we're working with chemistry and biology to do image things that are too small to be seen. You know, to work with healthcare and people like that. But actually, the only point we're focusing is during the degree. We know them down in the degree, and then when they get beyond that, go, actually, we don't exist as physics beyond your first degree. We now become multidisciplinary.
But we're doing that too soon in school, aren't we? We're doing it that we're trying to force an identity on them in school of what, again, use the example of physics, of what physics actually is, and we're forcing that on them. And I think that's because we're doing as we were done to, and we're not creative enough. And I think we have got the agency to do that. I do think we can do that even within the current system. And it would be great to change the system so that we will give license to that much more. But I think some of that we can still do in our own individual classrooms.
Jeff and then Richard.
I think the question of the scientist as a storyteller is an interesting one, because by definition we've stopped as a society doing storytelling. From my perspective, the idea of sitting down with a cup of tea or a glass of water or something else and telling stories and sharing the narratives of what all of us do during a day or during a term actually creates that cross-fertilization of ideas. It's like the coffee machine culture. Sometimes you actually have to recreate stuff like that to get those ideas to come together. I think the question of storytelling and communication in the world in which we live is being taken away, because the interpersonal side of things is partially being replaced by the use of digital technologies and channels. And it doesn't replicate all of the human interactions, because actually it's not just a matter of getting that pureness of message, it's the bits that hang off the edge of it. It's the fact that, thanks to what I've done in the last hour, I now know of a podcast I want to look at and listen to. You know, that piece of information wasn't something I searched for, it's just happened. And again, this question of the stories that people remember is part of this, because we all remember stories. It's the teacher who tells us those stories. The chairs we're sitting in, the nearest factory of ours to here produces polyurethane foams. The reality is that can be made into balls or seats or insulation for homes. Take your pick. It's just a matter of chemistry. The physics comes second, but that's another conversation. But
if there weren't any living organisms, Jeff, you wouldn't even have those fibres in the first place. So I think the biology comes before the chemistry.
Well, obviously, as an ecologist, I can start with the meaning of life, so we can go right back to this one over a glass of wine, Richard. So I agree with you completely, but for me, it's actually about the richness of storytelling. And I look happily at our colleague over here who's capturing some of what we're doing in pictorial form. And that, for me, is also part of this, because many of us learn and listen in different ways. We can't be prescriptive. There are some people who look at pictures, and there are some of us that look at lists of words and all points in between. And as the great philosopher once said, it is the way you tell them.
Richard, on that
Well,
one.
I had a completely different point to make, and forgive me if this is a bit of a rant, but I think we're responsible for turning children off physics. I think the way we've structured our curriculum suggests that at 12 years old, when a child is in year 8, they may be told that they're not good enough to do physics. They have to do combined science. And for a child who's got a passion in science, but for some reason or other has been selected by the school to do a different course, they have doors closed to them at a ridiculously early age. And if I could make one change from government, it would be to abolish biology, chemistry and physics GCSE.
So, my mum went to a school reunion recently, and she walked into the chemistry laboratory. She hadn't been in that chemistry laboratory for 40 years, 50 years. As she got closer and closer to it, she felt physically sick after 50 years. And that's because she hated that room. She hated feel like she couldn't answer the question. She hated feeling like she couldn't do chemistry. Conversely, I had a great GCSE history teacher, and I couldn't take A-level history for the options I wanted to do, and I've always regretted it. And I still love history, and I get books when I get the opportunity to. I watch it when it's on TV. For me as a teacher, fundamentally, it's got to be about the relationships I've got with the kids. And if they can leave me with a sense of warmth about the subject, about me, just, oh yeah, physics, yeah, I used to quite like that. And not necessarily think I was brilliant at it, not necessarily think, you know, that I want to be a physicist, but just look back in warmth. Maybe 5 or 10 years down the line, they'll be watching the Brian Cox documentary, they'll be reading the book. I think how they feel about how they're in my room is the most important thing for me.
Louise?
So the only thing I'm going to counter this with is a piece of evidence, and that is that 48% of pupils in Key Stage 2 think that science is for clever people. And that's it. That's all I'm going to say. That's from a State of the Nation report that we released 2 years ago.
I'm getting red notifications. We're coming towards the end. I'm sure we could squeeze in one last question, if there is one.
This isn't a question, but a story, because we remember stories. I taught at a school called Counterstalk College, which was very revolutionary in its day. And the thing that made it revolutionary was we had a thing called team. And in team, I would be responsible for my tutor group. And I would teach them in an open area, maths, English, integrated humanities, and science. And I'm just reflecting on it, you know, when do we need to tell kids about that they're physicists, and when do we need to say you're not good enough for physics or something like that? This was a 14 to 18 college in Leicestershire, and everything was integrated around the tutor group, not around the subjects. And I remember finding this quite strange when I got there first. And they said, but I'm a teacher of biology. And they said, no, you're a teacher of students. And that shift from seeing I'm not a biologist or a physicist or a chemist, I'm someone that works with kids, was really a moment of enormous importance to me. I think that's kind of relevant. I'm not quite sure how, but it was. It just came back to me as I was hearing the arguments about subjects and thinking it's important, but at that time in that school with my kids, some of whom I still see 20 years later, because one of them's got a job on the railway station in Leicester, and he still remembers me and I still remember him. It was about people, relationships.
Dagger's drawn.
Can I?
That's the crucible. Yes, you can, Louise.
So I totally agree with you, and I had a year 6 girl who was doing a science lesson, and Ofsted were there and asked her what subject she was doing, and she looked at the inspector in the eye and said, learning. You don't want to hear that. You want to hear that because I'm doing inquiry, it's science. But I'm communicating with everybody, so that's English. I'm recording my results, so that's maths. I'm wondering about what happened at the last time, trying to recall things. So that's kind of using history skills. She said, I'm trying to think about how it's using geography as well. Music, because I'm humming everything to make sure I can remember it. And she said, is that good enough for you? And I was absolutely gobsmacked. But yes, she was doing learning, and that was the important thing.
I'm going to have to bring it to an end. I knew this was going to be good with these panellists. Can we give them a round of applause? From me, thanks very much. Really, really appreciate it. That was very interesting. And thanks to the audience. And to the sponsors.
Very special selection.
Absolutely. I think you're in the direction I was expecting.
Interesting.
Thank you, sir. Lucky you.